What's going on, everybody? It's Aurora coming at you with a brand new video, and so I decided another tier list is kind of in order, especially considering I haven't done one like this since, I believe, November of last year. I don't remember exactly when, or maybe it was like March of this year, something like that. But I haven't done a Floodgate tier list in a good while, and considering the amount of absolute blowout Floodgate cards right now in the current competitive scene, I think this is pretty warranted, not gonna lie. I do want to apologize real quick for my lack of uploads in the last few days, except for like the one that's gonna be up yesterday about the pure reason stuff. If you've been watching on my Twitter, which you should totally do for news channel updates, shitposts, and more, Overwatch 2 is slowly consuming my free time. I'm really excited to be back into the game because I'm trying to actually play competitively now. But regardless, I decided I want to make a video on the most popular Floodgates right now, or at least some of the most popular Floodgates, because there are a lot of Floodgates right now. So you can see what you should probably either look out for or consider playing in your own main or side deck, especially if you plan on attending any big events. Yeah, I'm not going to waste too much time here. With that out of the way, here is my competitive Floodgate tier list for the October 2022 format. Just real quick, as a reminder for those that do not know, I do have little personal Floodgate icons, or I'm sorry, like ratings, I should say, for the tiers. We have Open the Gates, which is like the best of the best Floodgates. They're everywhere. They're super strong against the most competitive decks right now, of which I'm mostly going based off of like Sprite, Tier, Flu, Eldritch, and Math Mech, stuff like that. Strong AF are the ones that are just really strong. They're seen in a lot of side decks or even some main decks. They're gonna win you a lot of games. Situational are the ones that are either dependent on your competitive scene, like at your locals and stuff, or dependent on the decks that can use them. And then MST Negate is the tier meant for the ones that are either really bad right now or that you just shouldn't probably consider playing. But anyway, starting off with everyone's favorite Floodgate, we have Mystic Mine. This is going to be, of course, the very first in our Open the Gates category. Why this card is still legal after seeing so much topping success and being the bane of the audience's existence every time it hits the board is mind-boggling, but Konami just doesn't seem to want to get rid of it, I guess. Not gonna explain much there, I just hate Mystic Mine. Next up we have Antispell, and Antispell is also actually going to be going up in the Open the Gates category. By the way, I'm probably not gonna order this one like I do my actual deck tier list. I don't feel like it's really that necessary, but regardless, Antispell is an actually super strong card right now. It's really funny because everyone said Antispell was fine, but Imperial Order needed to go, and now everyone's saying that Antispell is the exact same as Imperial Order. I just find that really amusing. Yeah, Antispell is really strong right now, mainly because it's one of those things where you can do your entire combo and go through all of your spells that you need to use, and then flip it up on your opponent's turn as an extra piece of like disruption. And then depending on either your opponent's deck or even just their hand, depending on what deck they're playing, it could completely shut them down. Of course, it's super strong against decks like Runic, which is a really popular deck coming up right now, especially with the Sprite strategy. But it's also just really good if you're playing against, say, something like Drytron because they need their ritual spell, or even any regular deck that uses just the average amount of, spells, but maybe they drew like 3 or 4 of them and it turns off their hand without being able to use them. The card is seeing a lot of side deck success and main deck success in either trap decks or even certain tier limit builds, with the ones that are running Curious able to dump it from the deck off the Curious and then reset it off the Nightmare Griffin, should they not want to go for the virus cards. So yeah, Antispell's been around for a long time, and according to Konami, especially with Red Reboot going, it's probably going to be around for a lot longer. Next up we have Herald of the Arclight, and I'm actually, this probably shouldn't be on here, but I'm a bit biased towards it. I really like Herald of the Arclight. So I'm going to put it in situational though, mainly because only a few, handful of decks can actually make it. Granted, one of those is Sprite, though it is a lot harder now without access to Halka-Fibrax. But Arclight is just such a strong card, not only for the ritual strategies and stuff like Drytron, I guess, but also because it is an Omni Negate for literally anything that's a negate and destroy, as well as being able to be a pseudo macro Cosmos that probably doesn't hurt your deck too much, especially if you end up getting rid of it on the board, because it hurts decks like Tier because it banishes all monsters sent from hand or deck to the graveyard. That of course not only hurts their Rhino Heart and Foolish Burial and all of their milling, but it also even hurts things like Sheeran, because Sheeran has to send from hand for its effect. Also, sorry that the thing is unaligned right now. I have no clue how that happened. But yeah, Arclight is a really strong card if you can make it in your deck, especially because again it does act like that pseudo macro Cosmos, which is just a really good effect right now. So I feel like if your deck can play it, especially things like Tri-Brigade, of course, I feel like you definitely should give it a shot. Next up is Lancia, and that's going to be the first in our MST Negate category, so yeah, Lancia is going to be a lot better when we go past Photon Hypernova and decks like Shatrala, or I'm sorry, Kashtira, or whatever they named it over here, so dumb, becomes like the top contending threat. But in this current moment, everything just doesn't want to banish. Like, if they're banishing, it's going to be on your turn, which Lancia is completely shut off under, and especially if it's a deck playing something like Shifter, most of the time the Shifter does do a little bit of like a slap on the wrist to them as well. So if you like Lancia them for some reason, not only are you screwing yourself over because, I mean, you can't use it on your turn, but you're also probably helping them out a little bit. So yeah, Lancia, not too great of a choice right now. Next up, we have Scythe, and I'm going to be putting Scythe... I don't want to flood the Open the Gates categories. I'm probably going to put it in Strong AF, so... Alright, so the main way to get Scythe out was the Hulk package, but Hulk being banned now, you're not going to be able to do that as often. So mainly it's like set for decks that use like Dagda and then like Tornado Dragon, is what would be the case if Red Reboot wasn't gone, and Artifact, Sanctum, and Trap Trick are both at 3 copies per deck. Yeah, a lot of side decks right now are putting in Scythe for games 2 and 3 for basically a free win button against 99% of decks right now, because you can have up to 6 copies of Sanctum in your deck. Not to mention decks that utilize the branded package, including, you know, Tyr, Despia, anything like that, even branded Eldritch, can utilize branded Expulsion, which can summon the Scythe to your field on your opponent's turn, which, I mean, it kind of just wins you the game there as well. It's very gross. I've seen it happen a lot at my locals. But yeah, so Scythe's most consistent way of bringing it out with the Hulk package and stuff is definitely, like, not an option anymore, but it's still a very strong card, especially without Red Reboot to stop it, and with so many different ways to access Sanctum. Alright, I even forgot to mention, you can also set it off a Nightmare Griffin, so there you go. Next up, we have Dimensional Barrier, and I wish this card got hit so bad. I hate this card so much. But yeah, Dimensional Barrier is super strong right now. You can kind of auto-win against a lot of tier variants that aren't playing the dangers and a bunch of link spam. You can win against decks like Sword Soul, just any branded decks, period. It's still just such a win button, and it was one of the main things that I requested for this ban list, because as a Sword Soul player, you can probably understand why I hate this card so much. A lot of people think it is being power crept in the form of Spellbound, which Spellbound isn't a D-barrier, it's a gnome material. If you want a D-barrier, we technically have, like, a new retrain of it, which I'm surprised they didn't get rid of this to sell the new retrain, but it's the one that says, like, if a player controls 2 or more of one monster type, you can prevent them from summoning any more, which is good against, like, Marincess, I guess, but who cares? Yeah, D-barrier, still around, still a nuisance. I hate this card so much. So incoming a very interesting card for this format, we have Different Dimension Grounds. So I'm going to be putting this in the Strong AF category. For those of you that don't know what Different Dimension Grounds is, it's a trap card that simply says any monster sent to the graveyard this turn is banished instead. Not only is it a good trap trick target, considering it is a normal trap, but it's also a really good out to decks like Tyr, for decks that can't play something like Dimension Shifter, which we will get into in literally just a few seconds. And it's just super strong in games 2 and 3 if you're forced to go first, especially if your deck doesn't care about your own monsters being hit on the opponent's turn. It's definitely not as strong as something like Shifter because it is a trap card. You can't activate it from hand or anything. You can only activate it if you go first, but it is a very strong card this format nonetheless, in a format where macros are amazing. Speaking of which, Dimension Shifter, guys. I know I said I wasn't going to order this very much, but guys, Dimension Shifter, this card, if your deck can play Dimension Shifter in the main or even the side, there is no reason for you not to be playing it right now. I am literally playing this in my side in Sword Soul, which has a lot of effects they want to hit the grave with, and all the Tenyies, but this card is just so damn good right now that I'm still playing it. Considering both the reprint and the 2022 Megatins, as well as the Crystal Beast structure deck, it's also a very safe purchase right now, and it's also super cheap. I think it's like 50 cents for the common, and it's like $1 for the ultra. But you can pick up this card and use it for at least like 2 more formats probably, depending on how long it takes us to get the next list, and you can absolutely just turn skip so many decks by making everything get macroed for 2 turns. You got decks like Drytron, you got Tyr, you got, you know, literally almost anything right now folds to a Dimension Shifter, which is why a deck like Exo Sister is able to compete, and why a deck like Flunderies is like one of the best contenders in the game right now. Konami, what were you thinking printing this card? So next up we have Droll, and Droll I'm going to put at the top of situational, because, okay, if you're competitive scene, like if you're locals and stuff, or you know like a regional's going to have a lot of like local players that you know, if you know Droll is going to be super strong against them, absolutely be my guest, put it in your side deck. But overall, I don't think Droll is too crazy, because it's pretty good against Runic, especially if they draw mostly like the sprite cards. but they can just like use their stuff on your turn anyway to facilitate advantage. It's decent against danger tier. They can still activate the dangers, they just cannot draw off of them, so they can still use them to send things. But just all around, I don't think many decks are gonna like immediately scoop to Droll. I mean, like obviously like Drytron, I guess, but a lot of decks can at least make some sort of end board through Droll or play somewhat around it, which is kind of annoying, but I mean, Droll is also kind of annoying, so it's kind of fair. It's one of those things where it's like, if your deck can't afford to play any of like these stronger floodgates up here, then if you have the room for it, absolutely throw it in there. It's still a really strong card, but I don't think it's like necessarily strong enough to put it in the strong AF category this list. Next up, we have Goin Match, and I think Goin is pretty damn good right now. A lot of decks that are utilizing Goin are the ones that can main it, things like Marincess and such, and it's really good against decks like, let's see, Flunder, because Ravana is a water for some reason. It's pretty good against certain tier builds, especially if they summon their Rhino Heart first. They're going to be stuck locked into waters, and it's okay against Sprite because Sprite will have to utilize their first, like, small engine of sprites, like, you know, the blue, the jet, the gigantic, but they can't go into, like, the red, the carrot, the elf, things like that. I think it's definitely a little bit situational, not enough for me to put it in situational, but I think the card all around is pretty damn strong. Next up, we have Nightmare Corruptor Abley. So this was definitely, like, a little bit of a throw-in, kind of like throw, like, a wrench in the mix. I'm going to put Abley in situational. I think Abley is very strong, but very few decks can actually utilize her. Mainly the ones that can are the ones playing the Sprite package right now, because a lot of the builds, especially things like Tri-Brigade Sprite that you know you can dump kit off of, Sprint has allowed them to access the Abley a bit more consistently. Because one of the big problems with something like Tri-Brigade Sprite is that if you try to go for the Abley lock, unless you had a Fractal already in hand, you really couldn't do much to access your Tri-Brigade engine without using your Gigantic to summon your kit. Now, however, you can go into Sprint, dump whatever you need from your deck, and then use your Sprint and something in hand to go into the Abley. Abley is a very strong floodgate. It prevents your opponent from literally special summoning anything except for Link monsters, meaning that a lot of the Sprite builds can use something like Smashers, or in Tri-Brigade's case, Revolt, to hit any normal summon for the decks that can Link summon and that want to use their normal summon to access a Link monster, as well as making your opponent, if they can't out it that way, by having to put it in attack and then crash it into something, not only taking a good chunk of damage, but also losing their battle phase. It's a very abusable and loopable card, and it's really strong in the decks that can use it. However, it is very limited in the decks that can. Next up, we have Border, and I mean, Border's okay, but when was the last time you've seen like a competitive deck utilizing Border in the TCG and actually like topping an event? Because Border is one of those cards that, with Link monsters and everything being so easy to access, especially with like Link 1s and such, as well as cards like, you know, Branded Fusion, just giving you a free fusion without needing any requirements to use your monster effects for, it's so easy to just bypass Border's effect and then immediately out him in like a second, that the only deck I've ever seen this scene play in recently is like True Draco, which I mean is a little bit better now, but would you really want to normal summon Inspector Border instead of using your normal summon on something good? Next up, we have Mistake, and Mistake goes in the same category. Droll already is pretty situational, but Mistake being a trap card and affecting both players and doing it like permanently is a bit obnoxious. And it's not like it's a normal trap that affects it for like a turn that you can search off of Trap Trick. It just sits there, and a lot of trap decks can get screwed over by it, especially decks like Labyrinth that would like to use powerful floodgates, even though Labyrinth probably uses like the least amount of floodgates out of any of the trap decks right now. So yeah, Mistake is just a bit too iffy. Next up, we have Rivalry, and Rivalry is actually even stronger than Goin right now. A lot of decks that can utilize Rivalry are utilizing it. A lot of decks like Sword Soul can actually use it, which is pretty strong. Helps them compete a little bit, and it's a little bit better in matchups like Tier and Sprite. It's a little bit better in matchups like Tier, in which, you know, Goin wouldn't affect them as hard because they are going to be locked into Aquas, which, I mean, they have a very limited pool. They have, like, their main deck stuff, Kit Kalos and Kaleido Heart, and now they have, like, Lulu Karas, I guess. But Rivalry is not only a lot easier to use than Goin, but overall does a little bit more, except for, like, maybe the Sprite matchup, because they are all Thunder, but, I mean, whatever. A lot of rogue decks and tier 1.5 to 2 decks are able to utilize a card like Rivalry, and it is very strong because of it. Next up, we have Silent Graveyard, and I'm actually putting Silent Graveyard in the strong AF category. This card is another really good like side deck tech choice like Different Dimension Grounds for tier limit. If your deck does not care about triggering graveyard effects on the opponent's turn, or even on your turn for that matter, because it is reactive to things like Hovness or when going second, for the simple cost of a discard, you can Abyss Dweller both graveyards. Again, granted, this will hurt you a little bit if your deck does rely on graveyard effects as well, but if you can afford to play Silent Graveyard, it is going to be a massive blowout. Again, it is a quick play, so you can very easily access this on either turn, and it is a really strong and increasingly popular side deck choice for this current format. Next up, we have Skill Drain. I'll put Skill Drain in Open the Gates. Skill Drain, I can't really explain too much there. A lot of decks like Eldritch can abuse the fuck out of this card. And yeah, like a lot of the fusion decks and stuff like Tier don't really care about Skill Drain, like as much, at least depending on their hand, because they can just like, you know, use their graveyard and hand effects and then, you know, just fuse and do a bunch of big bunguses. But it can hurt decks like Sprite as well as some other top contenders like Flunder. Next up, we have Summon Limit, and I'm going to put Summon Limit in situational, mainly because very few decks can actually use Summon Limit like properly. I've seen a lot of people actually use Summon Limit on me or cards similar to Summon Limit, and it doesn't really do much because they end up hurting themselves off of it as well. Don't get me wrong, it is very powerful if you can resolve it against the current top decks, but the problem is finding a deck that can properly utilize it without screwing themselves over. Next up, we have There Can Be Only One, and wow, this card is crazy good. So only a handful of decks, again, can use this card, but the ones that can are very strong decks like Eldritch, and even a lot of tier players are like using There Can Be Only One because they just like sit on their Kaleido Heart. Dragostapeli is a plant. Mirror Jade, if they're playing the branded build, is a worm. The card locks down a lot of strategies like Sprite especially, and it can also hit things like Flunder. It also, I believe, because, you know, Runic does play the Sprite package, it's going to hit the Runic matchup. It's just very versatile overall, especially, don't get me started on how much it murders rogue strategies. I hate this card with like a burning passion as a dinosaur player. And if you can play this card, it'll hit a lot of their 1.5 and lower matchups that you'll have, so you kind of just get free wins there, and not to mention, of course, Sprite as well. Next up, we have Token Collector. This is another MST negate right here. Token Collector is just a bit too niche right now. Adventure and Sword Soul have stepped down. If your locals has a lot of either of those, then you can totally play it, especially if you like have access to Beatrice, right? Like I know my friend Chris on the channel, he's really annoying because he plays the one Token Collector in the side because he has Beatrice. But overall, I just would not recommend Token Collector right now. Next up, we have Winda, and guys, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, Winda is a card. Funnily enough, a lot more decks can utilize Winda now. So Dogmatica is a really easy engine to use now with 3 Nadir Servant finally. But we also have decks like Tier being able to use it. Of course, you know, we've been seeing turn 0 Winda for ages with Tier, even though it is a bit less popular now. But the funniest thing, in my opinion, is that instead of going into something like Toad, Sprite players have pivoted, like the Pure Sprite or the Runic Sprite players, they've pivoted into summoning Gale Dogra, using its effect to pay 3k to dump the App Cologne, and then get access to the Winda from there with the Schism. I find that really, like, creative. I find it pretty ingenuitive, even if it is a bit unfun, but it is very strong and very easy to use, especially if you put it under a Sprite Elf. Now it not only can't be destroyed by opponent's card effects, but it can't be targeted either. So yeah, Winda is probably never going to not see at least some sort of play, be it competitive or rogue level, and so she's going to be in the strong AF category for this list. Finally, we have Zombie World, and I mean, Zombie World is pretty cool, but it's a little niche because you have to find a deck that can utilize it properly, while also having it not affect decks too much. I mean, the Tier matchup, granted, yeah, okay, they can't use their graveyard or field materials as aquas, but if they just have something in hand, they're not going to really care about the Zombie World, and then they're just going to get rid of it off of one of their effects. If you can play Zombie World, I think it's a pretty cool like addition, especially if you can, again, use Beatrice, or have any other like consistent way to dump the Necroworld Banshee. God, when the Ishizu stuff comes out, this is probably going to be a lot more popular. But I just think that Zombie World is a bit too niche to play currently. But with that out of the way, that's going to do it for the tier list. I try not to dwell too long on too many things. Dwell, speaking of which, I forgot Dweller, whatever, Dweller's really good. Because I noticed a lot of my tier lists are like super long, and there's probably going to be like half of this video cut out because it's just a lot of me like making fumbles with my words. Keep in mind, it's like midnight right now. But yeah, there's a little bit of a better and more clean view for those of you that like to skip to the very end and not listen to a word I said. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Did I miss any floodgates, or any popular floodgates, I should say? Obviously, a lot of decks have floodgates like Dynamorphia or Rexturn, but I tried to use the most like easy to access ones for multiple decks, except for, you know, like Abley, but I thought Abley would just be funny for this current format. But yeah, let me know in the comments if there are any Floodgates you think that I missed, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as else for this video and the channel in YouTube recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like more tier lists, I'm trying to make more a creative tier list, like I said before. I'm tired of doing just the regular, you know, meta deck tier list on the last day of every month. Then perhaps consider subscribing, because we are on our way to 2,000 subscribers, and we are approaching rapidly by the end of 2022. Honestly, by the end of the week, I'll probably be at it, but I'm trying to get it done as fast as possible to feed my inflated ego. But it also supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. It costs you nothing to support the channel directly. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.